Howdy spooksters, this is Brett from Love Bats in the Belfry. This is a new vlog I'm doing of, I guess, just Brett's horror vlog, if you want to call it. I did one of these Brett's horror vlogs back when I first, when my wife Kelly and I started this channel. That was a long time ago, but I guess I'm bringing it back, quote unquote bringing it back. But I just want to talk about some things that we both have watched recently. Now, if you follow this channel, we did put up a vlog pretty recently of, we were about to go to the hospital to have a baby. And if you want to check that out, that is also on the channel. But we just got back recently with our new baby girl, and I'm now a dad. So it's been some sleep deprivation, not a lot of sleep, taking care of her. But in that also, we have a lot of time to kill and a lot of time to kill watching things. So I thought I'd probably take advantage of that anytime that our daughter is down for a nap, I can come on here and talk about things that we watched. So let's get into it. Skinamarink. Now, if you are a fan of atmospheric horror, movies that have barely any dialogue, and something that looks like it was filmed, on the most terrible VHS tape of all time, Skinamarink is the movie for you. And when I say that, it sounds like it's insulting to this movie. I'm just trying to be funny, but maybe that joke didn't land for you, so sorry about that. But Skinamarink actually is a really interesting idea of a movie. And the basic plot of this movie is, you don't really need to know a lot about it. Because this movie isn't really driven by its plot whatsoever. But basically, it's two children who live in their house, and they wake up one night and then realize that their parents are missing, and all the windows and doors to their house are also missing. And it basically just goes from there. And a lot of this movie is, there's barely any dialogue, and if there is dialogue, a lot of the time it's subtitled onto the screen because, being honest here, you have no idea what they're saying. So it's a good thing that there is subtitles on at least 75% of the dialogue that is in this movie. But my suggestion, if you do go to watch it, is to still put subtitles on, because there's certain lines that they don't have subtitles for, and you're like, I have no idea what that dialogue just was there. So I will say, if you are not a fan of atmospheric horror, or you do not like slow movies, stay as far away from this movie as possible, because it will only make you angry. To me, I like slow movies, I like atmospheric horror. That's the reason I wanted to watch this. The trailer definitely hooks you, because even if you're not a fan of slow burns or anything, watching the trailer, you're like, that looks cool. But yeah, the trailer definitely hooks a lot of people in, but the movie itself is not gonna satisfy a lot of people. And so to me, it is full of interesting ideas, and the quality of it. I have an appreciation for people who just have, no budget to a movie and are just relying basically on their creativity to make something scary. And to me, this movie, obviously what people find scary is subjective. I like this movie based on, it is scary because most people psychologically are scared of things that they can't see, or are scared of things that whatever they make up in their mind is much scarier than what is presented on screen. And this movie really plays with darkness and just still shots in a lot of moments in this movie, where it's just a still shot on a certain area or a certain room for an extended period of time. And so it's one of those things that if you're expecting a jump scare, it's, your blood pressure, your blood's gonna rise fast, because you're just waiting for the moment that there is a jump scare. But most of the time, there isn't one. So in a way, that's what makes this movie scary, because you're expecting something to come out or something to happen, and it's just it plays on darkness, and it plays upon your imagination. And that's something that I really appreciate about this movie. And I would say the last 10 minutes of the movie, I actually found genuinely pretty creepy. And that's I mean, that's dialed up like 100-fold from the rest of this movie. But it is a really interesting concept, and that's something that I recommend this movie to people who are fans of slow burn movies, who like, cinematography and like something that just creates a cool atmosphere. I think you'll really enjoy this one. So to other people who, like a narrative, they like a plot line, they like the plot to be driven, you're gonna hate this movie. And so if you've watched any reviews on this, most people will tell you if you like things happening in your movie, you're gonna hate this movie. The Walking Dead season 7 and 8, we just finished watching, and a lot of people have very strong opinions on The Walking Dead, especially those who are a fan of the comics. Now, I never read any of the comics, but as far as The Walking Dead, I kind of understand everyone's opinions on as far as the show died when Glenn died, and I kind of agree with that. It's funny because I actually do really like the character of Negan. Like, he is really funny at times. He's a terrible person, but he is really funny at times and extremely charismatic. Unfortunately, his character comes in at seasons of the show when the show started getting pretty stale and getting a lot worse. I will give credit to season 7 of The Walking Dead. I actually really enjoyed season 7 despite it being a pretty slow season. It's funny, with at least season 7, like, there's this poster that says like "Rise Up" and it has Rick on the front of it with his revolver. It's funny though, because to me season 7 really comes off as quite the somber season, because you had this explosive first episode where Glenn dies and Abraham dies, from Negan, and he straight up bashes their brains in with his Bat Lucille. But yeah, in a way, it's like, I can understand why people think that the show died when Glenn and Abraham died. If there's one character I miss besides Shane, it's Abraham, because Abraham just said some of the funniest stuff ever. And yeah, with Glenn also dying, that's like one of the saddest deaths of the show and one of the most brutal deaths as well. And especially with Maggie being pregnant, it's devastating to watch. And so I can understand those who were really into the show, and then they got to this moment where it's like you straight up see like all the graphic, brains and everything all over the ground of Glenn's. So if you're not like a hardcore horror fan, I can understand why that definitely turned you off from this. So, I mean, but that in itself, season 7, and while it was slow at a lot of moments, I do understand why they extended all of season 7 out to really expand upon the Saviors and Alexandria and the introduction of Hilltop, and then there was Oceanside. Like, I understand like expanding out all, this lore for it, and I don't know how in depth the comics were as far as that goes, but I remember at first when season 7, and like I had heard that, season 7 wasn't the end of the Saviors and Negan was still alive and they were still fighting Negan and the Saviors at the end of season 7. I was like, oh my God, how much are they going to drag this out? I actually understand that more than why they decided to extend out the governor story in season 3 going into season 4. Like, that was unnecessary to me. Like, they should have just wrapped up season 3 with just a heck of a like, if you took the Too Far Gone episode from season 4 and that was your last episode of season 3, that would have launched season 3 even bigger than it was. So, and then, but they just decided like, oh no, the governor they fail at taking over the prison. The governor loses his mind and kills all his minions. And it's like, that is interesting in theory, but it's like, if you had an opportunity to just, naturally came to a conclusion, like, why didn't you just do that? And they just decided to keep it going, and that was really unnecessary to me. But yeah, like I said with season 7, it's like, I understand why they were doing this. They were really building up Negan as being this really awful almost final boss type villain. And, that goes into season 8. And season 7 had a handful of really good episodes. But season 8, that was quite the chore to get through, I will say. When season 8 first started, I was like, I don't see all the hate for this. But as it got more and more into season 8, I get all the hatred for it. One, some of the writing was really bad. And, another thing is, people's outrage and hatred for the writers killing off Carl. I completely understand it, because that was the dumbest thing you could have done to the show. And it was I know there was all this controversy with Chandler Riggs and Scott M. Gimple, one of the writers on the show. I mean, I don't know the story, obviously, and you can only speculate what had really happened, but most of how the story went was Chandler Riggs, the actor who plays Carl, wanted to go to college. And he said, at least he wanted to go to college, but he was still going to remain on the show. And he was going to move to Georgia, where they were filming, and, still be on the show, but go to college at the same time. And apparently, I guess some of the writers or some of the people behind the show thought that was stupid, so they decided to kill off Carl. And, I understand the whole, when it comes to real life, it's yeah, you could be the greatest, walker killer, in all the land. I don't know why I said in all the land, but yeah, accidents like how Carl had gotten bit by a walker, it's I can see how that could happen. But still, you don't kill off Carl. Carl was the future of the show. And it's if or when Rick dies, Carl was the heart that was going to carry on the show. And then you killed off Carl. And, Andrew Lincoln, left the show at the not even the midpoint of season 9. And there's all this controversy. So it was just when you kill off Carl, you killed off a lot of the heart of the show. And, while you still have some great characters like Maggie and Daryl and Carol, they weren't everything to the show. And, and that's another thing a lot of people were saying about the show. It's when you have a show where you kill off a bunch of main characters, a lot of people aren't going to be invested in these new characters. And I can understand that. But yeah, the whole killing off Carl thing, that was the biggest mistake the show had ever done. It wasn't killing off Glenn to me. Killing off Glenn sucked. I agree with that. But when you have a big villain like Negan, you needed him to do something crazy drastic. And it's that was a moment that everyone still talks about. And, I love Glenn as a character, but the thing is, he died that way in the comics. And so that was something they were loyal to with the comic book series. But killing off Carl, to me, that was the nail in the coffin. And I'm still trying to stick with the show right now. Kelly and I we're about 7 episodes into season 9. We finished, Rick's, wrap up on the show. And the way they wrote off his character, I think was pretty decent, actually. I'm kind of glad they did not kill off Rick Grimes, because to me, Rick was, he was a huge heart of the show. He was the main character. And, you can still, obviously, they carried on the show without him. But it's once he exited, it's where do you go from here? And am I still invested? Even though I love Daryl, I love Maggie, I love Carol, do I really care about where it goes from here? Excuse me. Walking Dead season 8 was really a chore to get through. Once Carl had died, I had a really hard time being that invested in it. And even the way they wrap up the war between the Saviors and Alexandria and Oceanside and Hilltop, I don't know, it was clever what they did, but it wasn't really that satisfying. The whole, Eugene was making all the bullets for the Saviors, but he made them in a way that it would sabotage all of them. So by the time they opened fire upon Rick and all of the gang, the bullets just like malfunction and everything. So it's just like they are screwed at that point. And it's like, that is a very clever way of having your war come to an end. And, you know, I did like the fact that it was like, Rick just didn't want to kill a bunch of the saviors, and the whole fact of Negan's philosophy on saving people and making deals with them, like, in theory, is a good idea, because it's like, if you don't have to kill people to overcome these obstacles, don't kill the people. You know, make them join you. And it's like, hey, if you put in your 2 cents and you contribute to our group, you know, you have a place to stay. You have a community upon you. So, like, that was interesting. I like how Rick was like, you know, you can join us, you know, we'll give you everything you need, but you won't have this terrible leader that is just going to threaten you and do terrible things, and you're afraid to do anything because he has so much power. And yeah, I like the way that wrapped up, but it really wasn't that like climatic, really, like as far as wrapping up season 8. And most people were like, you know, had their blood boiling. They couldn't wait to see Negan die. And I was definitely like that probably before. I was like, I can't wait to see this guy bite the dust. But the way Rick went about it, and I did like what, you know, him saying my mercy prevails over my wrath. And that's something I like, because Rick was always like, he was either Farmer Rick, where he was like really peace loving and really wanted to do the greater good, and then there was just complete psychopath Rick. And I liked how it was like, you know, Rick still, you know, had logical thinking, and that still overcame like his anger and everything. And especially with how they had to kill off Carl, yeah, stupid, but like how Carl died, Carl was like, you know, don't make this about, you know, just pure annihilation of the other group. It's like, just learn to live amongst one another. And, you know, you could say that's like granola tree loving hippie type thing, but I like that aspect of it. But wrapping up season 8, like, just the overall season was just, the writing was really, really bad. There was just moments that were just so dumb, and I don't know what was going on behind the scenes, or, you know, what different writers they had, but like, you could tell the show was really losing its footing at this point. And, you know, a lot of people were saying like season 9, it definitely gets better. And I mean, the last 2 episodes with Rick in it were really good. But now we're like on episode 7 of season 9, and, you know, this is a 6-year time jump, and Judith's a little bit older, but she's still a little girl. And then, you know, all of the groups are together, and, you know, there's still threats going on. But yeah, right now it's, because season 8 was such a chore to get through, it's like season 9 so far, it's not really wowing me all that much. So I'm gonna stop word vomiting on Walking Dead now. But yeah, season 7 was pretty decent, and I liked it despite how somber it was throughout. Season 8, I just had a really hard time getting through, because once you killed off Carl, I stopped really caring about the show. And even though there are, I'm sure, good episodes from here on out, like the overall story, it's like, you have no Rick, you have no Carl. They really were the emotion, and they were the emotional impact of the show to me. So that's done. Let's move on. Saw 1, 2, and 3. Kelly and I recently, I bought like the Saw like Blu-ray collection, and it has every Saw movie up to Jigsaw, the prequel movie. It doesn't have Spiral in it, but that's okay. Spiral is probably one of my least favorite Saw movies so far, and that is the most recent one. And I know there is apparently a Saw 10 that's going to come out, but yeah, we're trying to go back and rewatch all of the Saw series. And despite, despite whether we think certain Saw movies are bad or good, like, I still enjoy the series as a whole. And little tidbit, honestly, the Saw series was one of the first things that got me into horror movies. And despite it being ridiculously brutal, and most people call it torture porn, it's funny how this series actually got me into the horror genre, like legitimately. And it's funny just how a series like this, how brutal it is, like how much I got into the horror genre. But yeah, we rewatched Saw 1, 2, and 3. And upon revisiting those movies, one thing I did notice is, despite all the sequels that came after Saw 3, it really felt like Saw 3 was trying to be the conclusion of something. Now, obviously, if you're a horror fan, no franchise is really dead. It's going to keep going. Hello, Halloween, with like the 200-300 resets of the timeline. And they're going to do that in a few years because Halloween Ends, most people hated. So of course they're going to restart it. But yeah, with this series, it did feel like Saw 3 was kind of the conclusion because, spoilers for Saw, if you've seen Saw 3, John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, dies. He gets his throat slit by the person that he held captive in like this long-running game of tests. And yeah, I'll get to Saw 3 in a minute, but like as far as those three movies, it felt like it was trying to be like a trilogy, you know, because it's like, well, you killed your horror villain, you know, in what feels like the real world. So it's like, what do you do from here when your horror villain is dead? So, but obviously they found a way to keep going, and I'm all for it. This is one of the few horror franchises that it's like, I'll keep watching the Saw movies. They're just fun, goofy goriness. And so, like, as far as like the very first Saw movie, I think it is a legitimately good movie. Saw has a lot of flaws, no rhyme intended there. I think Saw, the original Saw, is a solid first movie, and I don't really have a whole lot to complain about. Like, it's a cool like play on, you know, investigating into a serial killer and who Jigsaw himself doesn't consider himself a murderer because he's like, I never killed anyone. It's like, well, yeah, that still counts as manslaughter. It still counts as you set up this entire trap for someone to most likely get killed. Like, that still makes you a killer. So, and I find that aspect psychologically really fascinating, that, like, you know, of course, you know, being a psychopath, you think there's not really anything wrong with you. And, you know, Jigsaw is just like, I've never killed anyone. But, you know, everything from the first Saw movie, just from Adam and Dr. Gordon being chained in opposite sides of the room and then trying to figure out this puzzle for them to get free. It's fascinating stuff. And even if you can't stomach like all the gore and such, like, it has enough where it's grounded to where it's like, yes, this can really happen, and it at least has the investigation aspect of that in the movie, and I find that part fascinating. Saw 2, I think, is a little more rewatchable than the original Saw, because most of the time, like, when you have these original movies and then you have like 18 sequels that go after it, usually the sequels are way more rewatchable because they're just easier to like sit through. And, you know, the original Saw is a lot more slower paced, I think. Saw 2 is like, there's a much bigger group that wake up in a room together, and it's a lot easier to get through. It's a lot more faster paced, and it's like you still also have the investigation aspect where you have Eric Matthews and like the police end up finding where Jigsaw is located and break into his place. And the aspect I really like about Saw 2 is Eric Matthews just simply sitting there and talking to Jigsaw, being like, why are you doing the things you do? And I do like also the aspect of how Jigsaw is like, I want to play a game. All I want you to do is sit here and talk to me. And Eric Matthews, of course, having this huge anger problem, cannot do that. And it's like, that's the thing about Jigsaw. It's like, he's just playing with you. It's like, in a way, he's like, he literally is giving you instructions. And if you just follow his instructions, most likely you're going to survive and you're going to get through it. But yeah, obviously that's easier said than done, especially when you wake up and there's like 18 chains like going through your skin, and be like, oh, all you have to do is just rip all the chains out from your skin and then you'll make it out. It's like, no, that's going to hurt like hell. Why did you do this to me? But Yeah, Saw 2 is still fairly enjoyable. I think it is one of the weaker sequels among the series, but overall it is an easy watch. And, I believe most of the Saw sequels were rushed out not long after the previous one, and especially with Saw 2, because the original Saw was a huge hit, and then it's like, all right, get Saw 2 out as soon as possible. And it's like, in a way, it's kind of like the Friday the 13th movies. It's just like, just have a sequel out, every year by Halloween time. And so, yeah, I think Saw 2 is probably one of the weaker sequels of the whole series, but not as bad as some of the others. Getting to Saw 3, the time I'm recording this video, we watched it yesterday, and Saw 3, I do like a lot, but this is where they took it and then ramped it up like tenfold with, the blood, the gore, and just the nastiness. Like Saw 3 has that pig trap where it's like that one judge is like, he has his neck like chained to the floor, and then the guy Jeff, who has to go through all these tests because his son was hit and killed in a car accident by this one guy, and he's just out for vengeance and like all the people who have done him wrong. And it's like the one pig trap is like the judge is chained to the floor, and the judge only gave the guy who killed his son like only 6 months in jail. And so while he's chained to the floor, all these pigs are coming across this assembly line and being dropped into all these saw blades and being grinded up. And like just all the muck is just being spewed out onto the guy's face. And it's like, so eventually he'll just drown in all this pig slop basically. And I'm not easily squeamish, but like this is one of those scenes where it's like, I really hope I'm never eating when this scene comes on. Not that I'm going to vomit, but it just grosses me out watching it. And, some of the traps in Saw 3 are probably among some of the most brutal and the most like disgusting. And especially the trap of the guy who hit and killed Jeff's son. He's chained to this thing called the rack, and it's where every limb of his body slowly gets twisted, like completely 360 degrees, and like all of his bones are snapping out, and like all of his like his arms and limbs and everything are just like, yeah, they're just like every which way. And yeah, it's brutal. It's a brutal movie. And it's like, to me, if they had wrapped the series up with Saw 3, it's like that would have been a heck of a finale, because you went the biggest you could with it. And, this is the movie that it had Amanda, at the end of Saw 2, you had the twist that Amanda was actually in on when she was in, the trap and the game with all the other people, that she was behind a lot of it. And she was going to carry on John's legacy when he dies. And so Saw 3 plays a lot with the fact that Amanda kidnaps this one surgeon, this trauma surgeon. And, John wants to play the game with her, that he's just like, you gave me the exact news of my condition in such a cold tone. And he wants her to try to do the best she can to keep him alive. So, there's one part of the movie where I love medical stuff, so this part I loved, but there's the one part of the movie where the surgeon doctor decides to remove part of John's skull to take pressure off of his brain. And I love medical stuff like that, like surgery stuff. And so she's just, completely in an unorthodox fashion, just like has this like, saw blade, and it's just like, I don't have all the medicine I need. And it's like, well, we're not going to a hospital, girl. You got to just do what you can. So she just has this blade and just like, cuts a piece of John's skin off with like the scalpel, and then peels back the skin, and then just like saws like kind of like this rectangle like shape, and then like removes part of the skull. And I don't know, just stuff like that fascinates me. And so that part is super cool. And of course the way this movie wraps up is just so like freaking gory. And like the big twist is that the one surgeon doctor and Jeff are married, and they lost their son and everything. So Amanda loses her mind at the end of the movie and ends up shooting the surgeon doctor like through the stomach as Jeff like walks into the room, so he catches her, and then Jeff is pissed off, and you know, it's like you don't shoot a guy fueled by vengeance, you don't shoot his wife. Of course he's going to raise the gun he has and shoots Amanda right in the neck, and so she just starts spewing blood, and it's like, yeah, she's not going to survive that, so she dies. And at the end where it's like, you know, the one surgeon doctor's just laying on the floor and she has that collar around her head, and it's like, it's, you know, if anything happens to John, it'll go off. So basically all these bullets will just fly through her head. And so John's final test to Jeff is just, I'm the reason you're here today. And it's like, do you have the forgiveness? It's like, do you have it in you to forgive me? Or, you know, any of those tools on that table you can use against me, so what's it gonna be? And Jeff, you know, ends up saying like, I forgive you. And then like 5 seconds later, he just turns the saw on that he has, and you know, he's like, oh, of course I'm gonna slit your throat. So it's just funny how it's like, oh, I forgive you, just kidding. And it's like, you know, I would have, like, in a real life sense, it's like you would have preferred the I forgive you and then nothing happened afterward. But of course, this is a Saw movie, so you can't have the boring ending. You got to have the crazy, explosive, gory ending. And so, you know, Jeff slices Jigsaw's neck, and then as he's bleeding out, he plays this tape and says, I'm the person responsible for the loss of your child, meaning like his daughter is now kidnapped. And in this Saw trap, it's like, and if you want her back, you'll have to play a game. So Jeff starts freaking out, and then the surgeon doctor, I forget her name, sorry, but she's just like, no, Jeff, and then her collar starts activating because, you know, Jigsaw's vitals are, you know, flatlining. So, you know, this thing goes off, and just like her entire brain and head is just opened up, and, you know, that was the end of the movie. And it's like, dang, that's a big explosive ending for your movie. And then there was a bunch of sequels after, which I don't mind. But yeah, this movie definitely felt like it had a finale, like it was the end of a trilogy, and was meant to be a trilogy. But, you know, horror sequels can't really die. So, but I really liked the aspect of Saw 3, despite its brutality. I really liked its message in vengeance and forgiveness, of just how, you know, when you're fueled by vengeance, it just makes everything worse. And it's like, it's really hard not to, you know, lose your mind and not be angry and not want to, you know, take matters in your own hands. But like, this movie was showing that it's like, it only makes everything worse for you, even though you're going through a great deal of pain. You know, if you learn to forgive, you know, you can live a better life, you can move on. And, you know, when Jeff is just fueled by vengeance through this entire movie. And it's like, as he goes through all these traps and, you know, has this anger towards all the people responsible for his son dying, like, he starts to have that, you know, human, we're empathic, and like, you know, we feel for other humans, and he has those feelings inside where he's like, even though he's seeing these people that caused him a great deal of pain, even though he's watching them suffer, he's suffering for it. And he's like, I can't believe I'm watching someone die in front of me. And that was something I really like about Saw 3, is just on the themes of vengeance and forgiveness. But I talked too long about this. I can't believe this video is this long, so I'm trying to just move along a little bit faster. But yeah, on to the next one. Death Spa. So Death Spa is a movie from the 80s, and if you see the poster is a lot cooler than the actual movie is. This movie, it didn't really have a whole lot going for it. I do love movies from the 80s, and I love the fashion of the 80s, just how over the top everything is. And at least this movie does have that 80s fashion going for it. You know, it really does have the look of an 80s movie. But despite that, like, the kills behind this movie really aren't that innovative. It seemed like they didn't really have much of a budget at all as far as like prosthetics or any blood. And I mean, the acting is not horrible, but yeah, this is a movie that just seems like uninspired with kills. Like, it's trying to be a slasher movie, but the kills aren't interesting, so it's kind of hard to keep you interested in this movie. But basically, it's like it follows this guy who is the owner of a health club, and just these freak accidents start happening. So I would just say it's Final Destination meets the YMCA. And that's about all I can say about it. It's not going to be super memorable. I'm probably going to forget about it tomorrow. But I mean, yeah, I wouldn't recommend this movie. I do enjoy bad movies, but this movie is like, it's just forgettable. It's not so bad that it's fun to watch. Yeah, it's just kind of forgettable. And yeah, it's a shame because it's like, if you look at the poster to this movie, you're like, that looks awesome. It's like, but the movie looks nothing like that to me. So yeah, you're not missing anything if you don't watch Death Spa. This next one is not a horror movie, but I just do have to mention it, that Kelly and I did watch The Whale, and very good movie. I think it was really well done. And, you know, with a movie like The Whale getting a lot of Oscar buzz and award, you know, type praise, a lot of the haters are going to come out of the woodwork here, and they're going to be like, that movie wasn't that great. You know, it's like when movies get a lot of hype, a lot of people who don't see them until later on or at the height of its hype, they're going to say, that movie wasn't that great. I don't know what everyone's talking about. But it's hard to hate on Brendan Fraser, and especially if you know a lot of the stuff that happened with Brendan Fraser, or I'm sorry, Brendan Fraser is like technically the correct way to pronounce his name. But when you look up like the things that happened to him in Hollywood, it's like, it's hard not to feel for the guy. And especially with this movie and like him turning in such a great performance, you know, it's hard to hate on the guy. And so he really did deserve, you know, an award recognition, and him just, you know, genuinely being in tears when accepting it. You know, he now is like back in Hollywood, like his career has been rejuvenated basically. And, you know, it's like, you can't help but love the guy. It's like, it's one of those few sentimental stories that it's like, it's actually nice to see, especially in a place like Hollywood and movies where you hear just, you know, this brutal business and just, you know, not a lot of nice things behind the scenes. And so, but The Whale, Darren Aronofsky, you know, he's usually really famous for a lot of his movies being like really downers. And some people could say that The Whale is definitely a downer of a movie. But I mean, the way it wraps up, I think it is in a way uplifting. And it depends on how you look at it. Like the way the movie ends, it's like you could say, yes, that was a downer of an ending. But to me, it definitely comes off as, you know, more of a message of hope at the end, and not in like a super corny way. And that is nice and refreshing from someone like Darren Aronofsky. And like, I mean, I like most of his movies, but Mother is one that I could not stand. So when this came out, I was glad to watch a movie like this from him and, you know, kind of give him good praise about it. And, you know, Brendan Fraser is the reason to watch this movie, and Sadie Sink, who, you know, is from Stranger Things, and she's in this movie and she does an amazing job as well, you know, for even just a small role. And, you know, I think most people would get enjoyment out of this. I think most of the time, like the movie about obesity and what happened to Brendan Fraser's character, it could be a bit morbid for other people, but it's definitely a movie I recommend for people to check out. Or if you just need a good cry, like this is a movie I think that could definitely, you know, benefit you. And one thing I loved about The Whale at the very end, at least towards the end, was you know, Brendan Fraser's character, at least, he's just an online school teacher, and like he basically is like at a low point. And one night he just emails out to his class. He's like, I want you all to write something just honest. Like, he's like, just be honest. It doesn't matter how long it is, just write something that's honest. And he starts reading some of these after he does that. How raw of emotion some of it is, it's like hilarious. It like, some of it is hilarious, some of it is heartbreaking, but it's, yeah, like what he said, it's honest. And that's what I love about that aspect. It's like no one is afraid to just be, you know, everyone has to like hide behind all these metaphors and, you know, not really say what they really mean. And I like that about it. And so towards the end, you know, he never really shows his face on camera, and then after he reads all these people's responses, that inspires him to just be like, I'm going to show you what I look like. And it's like, this is what I really am. And, you know, him being obese and like being 600 pounds. And I don't know, that really struck a chord with me, and I really like that. And so, but if you haven't seen The Whale, definitely check it out. I mean, it's not a total waste of time. I don't think it is, at least. And, you know, I understand that everyone's opinion is subjective, but it's like, you know, it's kind of hard to hate on like Brendan Fraser, at least in this movie, because I think he does great. But yeah, definitely check out The Whale. It's, you know, it gets high praise for a good reason. And finally, we have not finished this show yet, but Servant on Apple TV Plus. It just wrapped up recently with its final season, and we are about halfway through the final season. This is a strange show, and it's definitely not for everybody. This is a show I like strangely because there's really no answers given to you. Like, there's just enough to like keep you enticed of what, you know, all these things happening to Dorothy and Sean and Leanne in this family, and you're just like what is the reason for all these things happening to them? But it's like, you just don't know. If you just go with it, it's like it's a pretty enjoyable show. And if you like a good mystery or thriller, like, I could see a lot of people enjoying aspects of this show. I'm actually quite surprised this show went as long as it did, because if you do at least watch the first season of Servant, the way the first season wraps up, to me, is like a great horror movie ending. And honestly, if it was just one season, that would have been a great way to wrap up the show. But the show kept going, and it went, you know, season 2, and I was like, where do you go from season 1? And season 2, still, I had some enjoyment out of. And then the way season 2 ends, it's like, all right, obviously they have to go to a season 3, because it kind of ends on a cliffhanger. And then season 3, obviously it's not like a cliffhanger, but like something major happens at the end of season 3 to one of the main characters. So it's like, all right, obviously you got to do a season 4. And I didn't know it was going to be a season 4 was going to be the final season until it like went to premiere, and I was like, oh, okay, it is the final season. So yeah, Kelly and I are about halfway through the final season, and so far we do like it. I would say episode 1 of season 4 is just a ginormous CGI fest, which is something I can't stand when it comes to like horror thriller stuff. But yeah, that happens in the first episode of season 4. Like, it's pretty bad. But everything from after that, I don't mind so far. And I don't know what happens at the end, but I did read like people didn't like the ending because apparently it gave them no answers. It's like the ending of Lost. Like, people hated how Lost ended because people just don't know what happened, or people don't know any answers. And I mean, to me, it's like, have you ever watched Twin Peaks? You don't know the answers to anything besides who killed Laura Palmer like halfway through the second season. Everything else, you're like, why do these things happen? And it's like, maybe because I'm such a huge Twin Peaks fan that I like Servant, because you just get no answers. You're just like, you're just along for the ride. So maybe I will do like a overall, you know, review for the show Servant. But I mean, at least halfway through the 4th season, I am enjoying it. And yeah, hopefully it wraps up in a way that I enjoy. And just me personally, it's like, I'm fine with not getting answers to things or having to interpret things a certain way, but you know, general audiences like answers, and I get that, but at least for me, that's not me. So, but I like Servant. If you like things that are just strange and don't give answers, you might like a Servant, so I recommend it. So hopefully you like it. But I have talked entirely way too long. I want to thank you all for watching. If you've made it to the end of this video, you have the patience of a saint, and I appreciate you all watching. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in a future video. Bye.